Game over, man. Game over.
You're gonna need a bigger potion.
Why so serious?
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for April 30th, 2024, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Thanks for joining us for this conversation, everybody. Brendan?
Are you ready to talk to the devil?
I knew you were going to do that. I was placing an over-under. I was waiting for it. I knew it was going to happen. Should have placed a bet. Should have interrupted before you did it just to prove that I knew it was
I've
coming.
been waiting for a year and a half to bring that out.
The only reason why we're doing this review is so you could do that.
Exactly. Late night with me, the devil.
That's going to get old really fast. Your voice is just
Sorry,
too pretty,
I couldn't
man.
help
You
myself.
can't do it for too long. I'm going to miss your actual voice.
Yeah, I had to have fun. I had the button. I haven't been able to use the button until now, so
Have
felt
we ever
appropriate to
used it
bust
before in a prior episode?
No, I don't think so.
I know we tested it offline.
And a test, perhaps?
Yeah, I think we tested it during our award show of all times. I think you were going to use that as like a time stopper of sorts when we went too
had
long.
Contemplated that.
Yeah, but
it was
we
gonna be too
never
much of a hassle.
ended up utilizing it.
So, late night with the devil felt like the right time to bust out the devil voice, and I have no regrets.
Nah,
I
too
enjoyed
easy,
that
but it's
immensely.
you have to. Sometimes the easy option is the right option.
So, obviously we're here to talk about Late Night with the Devil. And what's interesting about my experience with this film, Brendan, is that it is an incredible example of my relationship to horror. Okay. Because I watched this film about a week ago now on my own. I decided with no plan at the time. We hadn't decided to talk about it here on the show.
Yeah.
There was no plan to do it on the podcast. I sought out a horror film simply because I wanted to watch it. I was eager to see it.
Geez,
Okay.
10 years ago, that would never have been you.
Yeah. In 2013, you would have never have heard those words come out of my mouth. Not even an ounce of it.
I still remember back in the day when I was first, becoming part of In Session Film, when I was being onboarded, if you will. You and I were living in Lexington, Kentucky together. We would sometimes see movies together, and we would see trailers because we would get there early enough to watch trailers. And if a trailer, like let's say for The Witch, played, you would lean over and say, "You're reviewing that on your own, Brendan." Like you couldn't even see movies like that, and then all of a sudden, you came of age. You appreciated that there are good films in this genre now.
Yeah, I've really come to love a lot of them. I mean, there were always going to be films that we were going to review. I talked about, I can't remember which episode it was, but sometime recently I talked about how, there was no avoiding The Conjuring in 2013.
Right,
we were going to do that. And at the time, I was, of course, deathly terrified. And I had a great time watching that film. I still really love that first Conjuring. We had a great conversation about it here on the show. And then, you fast forward a couple of years later, and not only was The Witch one of my favorite conversations we had all year, but that ended up in my top 10 of the year.
Yeah.
And, in 2014, It Follows was another one of those examples. Like, I loved that, loved the conversation.
The Babadook was another one you really liked as well.
The Babadook in 2014 as well. So, there ended up being these horror films that drew me into the genre that I had never really experienced before, not in a real way anyway. And so then over the last 10 years, it's constantly shifted. And now I find myself seeking them out. Like same thing we never had a plan to review it on the show, but I was dying to see The Pope's Exorcist for a long time last year. Like it came out on Amazon, and for a while it was like the $19.99 rental. I was
Oh
like,
yeah,
I
yeah,
can't
yeah.
I can't justify $20 for a rental. But it sat there and teased me for weeks. And I was dying to see it. Like I really wanted to see it. And then finally it got to the $5.99 or whatever it was. I scooped that up so fast. I rented that bad boy, watched it immediately, and
Nice.
loved it. Loved it.
What trash that movie is, but good trash.
Just absolutely enjoyed the living
Oh, and I
bejesus out of it.
love that we're potentially getting a Russell Crowe exorcism cinematic universe of movies that
Yeah.
have no relation to each other
I know
whatsoever.
it's gonna be great. I can't wait for that. Although I still want the 199 sequels they teased at the end of that film, The Pope's Exorcist.
Oh yeah,
But
yep, fair.
all joking aside, I really enjoyed that a lot. So like, yeah, I've come a long way in 10 years. Okay. And, it might not be a big deal for everyone else out there that enjoys the genre, but I have had, like, I was divorced from the genre for most of my life
Yeah,
and have come a long way.
it's a
since
huge
then.
deal when you learn to love something after all these years.
Yeah.
You're conditioned and trained to dislike something. It's like a certain food or a certain music group or whatever, and all of a sudden, a few years later, you've realized that liking them means you've grown up. So
Exactly.
yeah. So
And
it's
and
a
now
beautiful
it's
moment.
And honestly, it's just like any other genre. Just like there's action films, there's dramas that they don't look good, so I don't watch them. It's the same thing with horror. Like there are some that I'm like, I don't think I'll enjoy that. So
Yeah, but it's no longer because it's horror, right?
but it's no exactly,
Yeah.
and that's the big difference.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The First Omen, one of my favorite films of the year so far.
Oh, it's so good.
movie.
So good.
At any rate, we're here to talk about Late Night with the Devil, which is a film from, and I'm not sure how to pronounce the names, Colin and Cameron Cairnes. Is that how you would pronounce
Cairnes or
that?
Cairns, I think. I think it might be Cairns. For those listening, please correct us if we're wrong on that. But I think
Yeah.
it is Cairns.
Okay, so yes, and it stars David Dastmalchian, Laura Gordon, Ian Bliss, Faisal Bazi, and a bunch of others that come and go throughout the film. If you're not familiar with Late Night with the Devil, a live television broadcast in 1977 goes horribly wrong, unleashing evil into the nation's living rooms. All right.
Especially if you rented this movie or watched it off of Shudder. It certainly haunts your living room if you watched it there.
Exactly, which is how I watched it in
So-
the comfort of my living room.
So don't go in your living room. It's probably infected with something now.
Who knows? All right, Brendan, what did you think about Late Night with the Devil?
I think it rocks. I think this movie rocks. We didn't have this on our docket for quite a while. In fact, when did this officially release? We're a few weeks
We're-
late on this one.
Yeah.
Maybe a few months late on this
I
one.
was going to say, might even be a month behind, perhaps.
Yeah.
March. Okay, so it says here it played at South by on the 10th of March and then had a United States release of March 22nd.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So yeah, we're
a month behind.
Yeah, we're a bit late on this one. But sometimes when you see something even a bit late and you realize, I think there's things to talk about here, we'll give it a late review. So we're giving this one a late review because I do think it is one worth talking about. And I know it does have its defenders. It has overall pretty solid string of positive reviews. I think it's sitting at like a 72 on Metacritic, which again, it's an aggregator. Take it for what it's worth, but it definitely shows that it is still in the green. So people are averaging a positivity here. And I'll echo that. I think this is a very good movie, but I can understand why it wouldn't be for everyone if you can't get on its wavelength, because it is framed in a very gimmicky way. I mean, this basically is a 90-minute talk show episode is basically what this is. Well, by the gimmick standard, it's an unaired talk show episode that went horribly wrong, as that plot synopsis reads, as you laid out there. And that is its central. Like it has some behind the scenes footage that are in black and white to show some different character perspectives and whatnot, but this really does play out in real time. And I know that's not going to work for everybody. Your mileage may vary based on how much you either enjoy or despise late night television. I think the film very convincingly plays with that trope, though, so much that I actually want to hear this announcement that David Dastmalchian is going to be taking over the Tonight Show or something like. I think he is that compelling of a presence here. He is so
Mm.
magnetic as both a talk show host, but also this grieving husband, and we'll talk more about him maybe from a character standpoint as well. I think he plays both those really well, and it basically clouds his ability for rational thinking, which makes sense given the trajectory of this movie. Every performance here is really committed to the bit, especially Ian Bliss. He is
Yeah.
having a ball here as well. He was one of my favorite things, if not my only favorite thing in the Matrix Revolutions, but it definitely shows how much he likes to play with kind of the tonal weirdness of movies that he's in. It's certainly very campy in the right ways. And I think the film does build up in the right way as well. We see a lot of horror movies that are all about escalation, right? Horror movies that are kind of slow, but build to something ultimately. The First Omen was very much like that too. We mentioned that earlier. That movie is all about escalation. But I like how Late Night with the Devil does it in a bit of a different way. It kind of utilizes awkward tension as a horror tactic rather
Mhm.
than, more traditional tropes to get away with that kind of escalation. And then when it does deliver on its explosive final act, it leaves you with images that are kind of hard to forget. There are things that are shown at the end that are pretty surprising. And I also appreciate its commitment to ambiguity. We might have some thoughts there as well. I think this is a really interesting movie. Between this and The First Omen, if this is not a great year thus far in general, I think it's at least fairly strong for horror movies between those two. And say what you will about Immaculate. I know our editor-in-chief, Dave Giannini, loves that film. I don't love the film
Yeah.
itself, but it at least got people talking. The ending is great, and I appreciate its existence in horror films for this year because of that. But I think Late Night with the Devil, First Omen are the better examples of how to do it in a way that is horrifically effective. I think this
Yeah.
movie is very effective in that regard.
Yeah, so I liked this film as well. In fact, at times I quite liked it.
Mhm.
I will say, though, perhaps with some trepidation, given our challengers conversation. I'm not
Oh, we're
sure
doing
if
it again.
those
I love it.
listening have heard that or not, but I opened my thoughts with challengers by saying that I'm open to being swayed, and I feel the same about Late Night with the Devil. Now, our challengers conversation ended up being quite polarized.
It did. Yeah.
And, it was a
I don't
very
have the
different
energy to do that one again. So
like, I don't think this one will go quite down that territory, but I am perhaps open to being swayed on this film because I recently saw it. I haven't really wrestled with it as much as I would have liked to coming into this conversation. However,
Okay.
as I noted, I did seek this out a week ago, not knowing that we were going to talk about it here on the show, and I did very much enjoy it. I think the premise is actually really intriguing and a fascinating way to explore an individual who has a TV show and is utterly desperate and the horrors that can come out of that. I just don't know if the narrative does anything that is all that, like, I hate to phrase it this way, like that it's not new or different or compelling. Because I live by the ethos. It's not what a film is about, it's how it's about it. And the execution at times, I think, does falter slightly for me in terms of incorporating what is the live on camera broadcast and the behind the scenes footage that we do place. I think in a vacuum, both of those scenes both of those visual tactics are quite compelling. I don't know if they always coexist for me. And I think part of it is the chaos of what's happening behind the scenes. There's this show business energy that is in contrast to the horror that we're seeing in terms of what's on camera. And given that there are some pretty wild things that happen on camera, for the behind the scenes to not always react to the perceived reality they are experiencing is a little jarring to me. So I don't know if the scenes always coexist. However, I still think the premise is fascinating, even if the writing is a little trite at times in terms of character motivations and some of the horror tropes that are used here. There's not going to be much here that's surprising, but in
Right.
terms of establishing a premise and fully realizing that premise, I think the film does a pretty good job in delivering on that promise.
Okay.
And I think it especially works, like where the film does thrive, it's in the performance of David Dasmalchian, who is
Yeah.
amazing in this film.
Oh, he's so good.
So good. He's really magnetic on screen, and some of the writing of his character, while again maybe a little manufactured, I think he does a
Yeah.
great job of giving credence to it with the emotional texture he has in his performance. And I very much felt it, and I believed him because at times, and I do think the film is trying to toy with what is manufactured and what isn't. There's some
Right.
dramatic debate about that on the surface. And his performance, I think, does a great job of writing that line
Yeah.
of giving credence to both sides of the argument. And I do love that about this film. And as you're talking about it, kind of coalesces into this moment of horror at the end that is quite visceral, certainly a little different than anything we've seen before. Like that's
Yeah.
where the movie does make up in terms of its horror qualities, and doing something unique is kind of the way it crystallizes at the end. So
Yeah.
despite a few reservations, I did enjoy this film on the whole.
Yeah, and I don't know if I can necessarily push back that hard on your reservations. I think if anything, the only defense I have and why they didn't bother me as much, because I do think you make some points, some valid points rather, that there isn't always a seamlessness in the way that it's told. And a lot of that is also restricted to the fact that the black and white sequences that take place backstage, it's meant to be a single camera backstage, so it's very
Yeah.
third person limited in that regard.
Yeah,
So we
yeah,
can't,
yeah.
we're physically unable to get reaction shots or general reactions from every character as necessary to justify where the film is going. It primarily follows the main host here, Jack Delroy, played by David Dasmalchian. So he's really our primary conduit in some ways. But his performance, David Dasmalchian's performance specifically, is really that saving grace as to why a lot of these things didn't bother me. I actually think it is one of the best performances of the year because he has to straddle this line between convincing talk show host, which he actually does very convincingly. I jokingly said I would love to hear him in real life become like the new host of the Tonight Show or something like that. And that, while that is kind of facetious, it's also not. Like, I actually think he is genuinely great at that kind of dynamic. But he also has to convince us that his actions, his choices as a host, and what's best for the show, or what he thinks is best for the show, his thinking is very irrational. In a lot of cases, kind of dumb. Like if you watch this movie and say his character is not all that smart and that's a criticism, I wouldn't disagree, but I don't see that as a criticism. I see that as a grief-stricken individual who is not, who has no longer, he no longer has his ability to think rationally. He's thinking for the success of this show. And the loss of his wife, which is established in the early stages of the film, I think David Dasmalchian does a great job handling that with a certain level of grace and believability that it just worked for me. It's hard to explain.
Okay.
It's hard to explain, but his performance is that conduit that made the film in totality work for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I do agree that his performance saves the film in many respects. And he adds this incredible duality because he's the talk show host of this late night program, and he brings on these characters that are, that are having this battle out of what's real and what isn't. And I think he does a great job of pandering to both sides, at least early on. As the film goes and we learn more about his character of Jack, that might dissipate a little bit, but that's where the emotional nuance in Jack does come out a little bit more, as it should, given the revelations that we learn about
There are
him.
certain revelations that happen on camera, on the live program specifically, that may or may not involve his late wife.
Yes.
And that justifies his irrational thinking for sure.
I agree. And some of those revelations from a narrative perspective admittedly leave something to be desired.
They're a little contrived, but but that's the thing. Like, I don't necessarily disagree with that. But man, sometimes a good performance can make you not even think about those things.
And I agree. Because I think of the moment, and I'll be vague here to avoid spoilers, but there's a moment where they're having a debate. The people on stage are having a debate, and Jack, he suggests that, hey, let's look back at the footage to see if this thing really happened or not. Yeah. And they do, and he's working with the technicians to find a certain place within the footage to demonstrate that this is real. And when he realizes that there's something in the frame, something that he recognizes in his performance, you get this nice close-up on Dasmalchian that is incredible. That's really great. Like, you see him recoil in this interesting way where internally he is unraveling, but he has to maintain the facade because he has an entire audience watching him. Yeah. And not I mean live audience, but also at home audience. So he's having to maintain this facade, even though underneath you can sense that he's crumbling a little bit.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
Those are the moments here that I think are really great. So yeah, despite those reservations in the writing, moments like that performatively are very much take the film to a new level.
It adds layers to the film that certainly don't exist on the page, because it gets you to think about what it means to actually be in this kind of business and to maintain a certain composure to keep the show going in an authentic and believable and business savvy kind of way. But deep down, you're unraveling in the moment. It's like a performance on stage in many ways as an actor. I mean, basically, in many ways, it's about what it means to be an actor on stage and losing your crap mid-performance, right? It's like how do you maintain that so the audience doesn't realize that something's going wrong? The film is not really about that, but David Dasmalchian's performance indirectly suggests that thematic idea.
I agree.
And but that's what makes his performance so great, is that it's creating new layers of this onion to peel back that don't really need to be here. And I find myself looking at it.
I agree. I mean, even the moments of urgency that he demonstrates earlier in the film, again, from a writing perspective, there isn't really anything all that complex to it. We've seen that before. The TV host or the program host that is losing ratings, he's got to do something to bump the ratings.
He does some Jerry Springer-like stuff to try and boost ratings.
and the gimmick of what they're attempting to do on live TV, it's all about the ratings, right? We have to get as gimmicky and wild as possible. We got to get Jerry Springer in order to bump the ratings. And so from a writing perspective, that leaves something to be desired, but the way he taps into that urgency performatively makes something out of nothing. And it's certainly a testament to his performance. He's magnetic here. And I think on a different note, but similarly, I think of Ian Bliss here as Carmichael, who is this magician turned skeptic, and he's really fun. Like, he's doing the antithesis work of Dasmalchian in the sense that he's much more overt, he's brazen, he's abrasive. You know, he's not afraid to confront the other characters and their kooky schemes that they're cooking up here. Yeah. And I love how loud he is. It's a very loud performance. I do not believe you. I am very confident that I can convince the audience that what you're doing is not real. And again, don't want to get into spoilers, but the way things crystallize for Carmichael at the end is just so good. Yeah, it's fantastic.
His performance is very campy. like I said in the
Yes,
beginning.
very
And
campy.
it's very jarring when compared to Das Malmsteen's performance, which is not very campy at all. And yet somehow they feel like they still kind of belong in the same movie, which is a testament to the filmmakers here and their ability to manage tone. Because there are moments here that the film kind of veers a little bit into almost grindhouse film territory in its horror and some of the things that we see on screen. I don't want to get into specifics for spoilers' sake, but some of the things that we see get almost David Cronenberg like in a cartoonish kind of way, and it's admittedly kind of silly, and yet tonally I was sort of off put by. I was recoiling
Yeah.
at a lot of it. I think a lot of it is again due to this balance in tone, not just in the filmmakers and their efforts, but you have two main performances here that are getting the most out of their respective screen times, and they represent that tonal imbalance, and somehow it brings balance to the film as a whole. I mean, this is a movie that could have easily wore out its welcome. It's a 90-minute movie, and it plays like a full-on 90-minute talk show episode on late night TV. And I understand how it's not going to work for everyone. This is a movie that will test your patience if you're not open to that type of gimmick. You might find yourself not only put off by it, you'll probably find the experience tedious. And I know some people who have found the film tedious, and I don't really have an argument against it. It's really just about how your mileage may vary with it.
I agree.
But I think a lot of it is that tonal management and how they're able to sustain it through constant buildup, and how those performances are just at such odds with each other.
I
It
agree.
brings balance to the film.
Yeah, I didn't mind the gimmick at all. Maybe it's because I generally like late night TV. I like the.
Well, I was going to
structure
say
of
I
it.
kind of do too. But I'm someone that doesn't watch, like the Tonight Show or the Late Show all that often anymore, if at all. I might watch segments of it if they come online, but I kind of like the vibe of it.
Yeah,
I think the energy's good.
Yeah, I do as well. Like I've always enjoyed late night TV, to various degrees, and I think this taps into it in a really great way. Of course, there's the 70s aesthetic to it as well, which we'll have to talk about, but I do like how the film invokes that setting and that vibrancy, while of course tapping into this horror scheme that they're trying to set up here. And again, it's certainly tapping into some horror tropes that isn't anything new. However, as it relates to invoking them in this specific setting, that is new and different. And to me, that's where it becomes interesting, because you've probably seen images or video of the moment in this film, the chair levitating moment. And that on its own terms, I think is affecting enough, but that's ultimately, at least for me, not why I find it effective. Mostly why I think it works here is how it's in contrast to the moment with Carmichael following, where he sets up a demonstration to undermine the chair levitating moment. And he does this trick, and the way it's seen visually, I think, is really great. So there's this grossness to it. The performances, again, I think are very good there. And
the deconstruction of it later is also very interesting.
I was absolutely building to that, because the way we see it unfold in real time is one thing. And I think that as a horror scene, again, I think is effective, but it's the deconstruction of it, of the Carmichael gag, but also the chair levitating moment, because both of those kind of happen simultaneously. It's in the deconstruction where both of those scenes are ultimately utilized. And I think how all of that comes together is really great. So say what you will about them in a vacuum on their own terms, but I think it does coalesce into something that is dramatically and emotionally pertinent to these characters in the film.
You described that whole scene. I mean, this is not really a movie of scenes. It's really one scene. But you described that specific moment in a very high level, superficial way. Your reaction will be, oh, that's nothing new. That's not innovative at all. Chair levitating, someone trying to prove it wrong. We've seen that many times before. But this is what I love about Cameron and Colin Cairnes as filmmakers and storytellers here, is that they utilize the sense of place to their advantage to be sort of clever with that. It's
Yeah.
not just it doesn't just allow them to deconstruct and offer different perspectives that the cameras may have captured, but because this is a live program, or it's meant to mimic a live program, there's different editing involved to capture these scares. And that makes the film unnerving in a different way. Because we've seen many chair levitating specific
Yeah,
moments in pretty much
exactly.
every possession movie. But this
Yeah.
one, it's edited in such a different way that it almost, at least to me, it almost made it seem like I was seeing it for the first time. And that's the specialty of this movie, if you ask me, is taking the familiar and reinterpreting it in a new way, which is
Yeah,
why
I
I think
agree.
this film really does a great job taking advantage of its gimmick. And I keep calling it a gimmick, which almost makes it sound like a negative, because it's not gimmicky, but it's
Yeah.
a good kind of gimmick. It's the right kind of gimmick.
I agree. I mean, it is a gimmick,
Mhm.
but it works because, I don't know, it's appropriate in this meta way, because
Yeah.
what we're seeing on screen with Jack, he's indulging in a gimmick. Like, the whole thing is like, there's a gimmick.
The movie's
within
about a gimmick. It's about a gimmick.
It's about a
the
gimmick.
The gimmick is part of the plot.
Exactly.
It's
It
part
very
of the
much
movie.
is. It's all part of it. So I don't really have an issue with that. It's
Mm-hmm.
understandable given the situation of Jack and what we come to find out about his program.
Yeah.
It sets up for this horror to take place on a live broadcast. But again, it's not the setup of those tropes is certainly not what the film is about. They're
Right.
effective enough. It really does come down to how the film crystallizes and deconstructs those tropes. I agree with you. Now, we can't end this conversation without bringing up the elephant in the room, in the sense that this film was criticized heavily for its use of AI. Now, I don't
Yeah, I know.
know the extent. So, like, I was trying to find what the real answer is here, because I've seen reviews that state that AI is all over these films in the transitions and the interstills. But the directors here stated that, you know, they worked tirelessly to give the film this 70s aesthetic, and that they experimented with AI for 3 still images in the film that they edited further to utilize for these transitional moments. So, look, the use of AI, period, is not good. It's not
I
good.
agree.
I think where a lot of the discourse seemed to perhaps polarize itself is, how much weight do we put on 3 stills? And I think where I land on that is, yes, 3 stills in a 90-minute movie is not that big of a deal on its own terms. However, I think the problem is, if we let this slide, well, where does that move the bar then? Okay, well, 3
It's a great
stills
question.
here,
Yeah.
5 stills there, then it becomes a whole scene there, then it becomes half a movie. And I think that's where the concern comes in. I think it's less on, okay, a 90-minute movie used 3 stills, big whoop. And I understand.
What is it going to be
that.
a couple years from now? Did this set a certain precedent?
Did it set a precedent that, okay, like, yeah, I mean, it's kind of the breadcrumbs thing. And I think there is absolutely real consequences there.
Yeah.
That if we let this slide, then, you know, again, like, where are we moving the goalpost? And I think criticizing the film for using AI at all, or any film using AI at all, I think is a good stance to be on. So that's ultimately where I'm at. Even though it's only 3 stills, I'm glad that they capped it to just that.
Yeah.
And it ultimately doesn't affect the film in a vacuum all that much. But yes, I think we have to stand firm generally as film goers, as lover of the medium, as lover of the art. We have to push back as much as we can.
We have to. At the same time, we also have to question ourselves, and there's no right answer to this. It depends on the individual and how much weight they're putting on this action of utilizing AI, even in a small sense for a film like this. Does it affect your love of the film? in that way. Like, are you going to like the film less because of that? And that's perfectly fine if you do. I'm not here to say we should or should not. All I can say is I don't support the use of AI in general in that way. Now, at the same time, I would love to know what those 3 specific images were to see what they were in context of the film.
Yeah.
Because on the other end of that spectrum, I didn't notice it while watching the movie.
Yeah, I don't think most people will, because they're essentially the like the interstills of like the broadcast when they're like sending it to commercial break and you see like the broadcast images and we're going to break, we'll be right back.
Yeah.
It's mostly in those moments.
Which are probably moments where real life broadcasts nowadays would utilize AI for those transitions anyway in real life. So maybe there is a sense of realism there, but
It's
I'm not
also
saying
the
that
70s though. So
well, I know that, but I'm also not saying that as a defense. I'm just saying that if there's
I
any
hear
type
ya.
of realistic comparison to make as to when they might be utilized in real life nowadays, that would make sense. But I mean, I didn't notice them. It didn't affect my enjoyment of the film. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm okay with it being here. So it's kind of it's a twofold thing. On one hand, if they're going to utilize AI, I'm glad it's a moment like that doesn't require the same level of artistry or at least performative angle that takes away work from the real talent involved. Like, I'm glad it's at least utilized fairly, and I don't want to say smartly because that's the wrong word. I'm just glad it's as limited as it is. But I don't like that it's here because of what it could do. Yet at the same time, it doesn't affect the movie.
Yeah.
It doesn't affect my enjoyment of the film because I didn't even notice it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't affect how well I'm going to rank this as one of my favorites of the year, even despite that lingering disappointment that the choice was made.
Yeah.
So it's complicated. It really is. It doesn't make me like the movie less.
And that's it. You won't find them unless you're looking for it. You won't.
Yeah.
They're seamlessly interwoven into the film.
Yeah.
They're essentially part of the live broadcast, the toss to the commercial break.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't affect any of the drama, any of the horror, the performances, as we've been talking about. It doesn't affect any of that whatsoever. Should the Cairnes be criticized for it? Absolutely. Because we don't want to be moving the goalpost. We don't need to be implementing AI at all. At the same time, I don't think they have to be crucified for 3 still images, especially when there's a report that came out today that for the new Hellboy movie that's coming out, have you heard this?
Oh, this is rough.
The new Hellboy movie that's coming out, they used AI to render something like 5,000 creature designs that they're going to dwindle down to, I don't know, a few hundred for the movie, and they're sending those off to visual effects. So creature designs that are going to be in, like, that seems way more egregious to me.
I think I see what they're trying to do is that they're trying to give less work to visual effects artists who are already so overworked. But by doing so, you're basically taking away their level of artistry and contribution to a movie like that. So now it's no longer their vision. They're basically tracing something that AI created.
Exactly.
And that's a problem.
That's not going to be fulfilling for them.
No.
There's no way.
And in the case of Late Night with the Devil, it would be way easier and more necessary to heavily criticize the Cairnes here if, let's say, the AI images in this movie were the insert shots of the audience, meaning that all of these potential acting extras that could have gotten work being in this movie no longer had a chance because of that. Like, that's when it becomes a limitation of someone's job, then it becomes a huge problem. And it's hard to tell if that was the case here. Now, in the case of Hellboy, it absolutely is going to be, and that's what becomes really problematic.
That's an egregious
and I don't support
example.
That at all.
That's terrible.
It's awful. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, that's why we can't move the goalpost. That's why we have to stand our ground. Yeah. And even though it's only 3 still images, we have to be like, look, it's not okay. We can't use it because the next thing you know, Hellboy is using it to create 5,000 creature designs. And we can't stand for that. So, like, I agree. Like, in the context of this movie, it's really not that big of a deal. And I don't think that it really hinders the team of Late Night with the Devil all that much.
Right.
If we're at least taking what they said at face value. If I'm looking at it in good faith, I'm believing their word that it was just 3 still images that they edited down further with their graphic design team.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't have to crucify them. I will criticize them.
Yeah.
I don't think it's okay, but I'm not going to crucify them. Hellboy, on the other hand, we might have to.
We might
get
have a
out the whips
problem
and
here.
chains.
We might have
Yeah.
a problem.
There's going to be a problem there. Absolutely.
Yeah. There's at least a
So-
commitment to artists doing a job with late night with the devil here. There's
Yeah,
at least
and-
they still have that in the back of their minds.
And I think, yes, because we also have to give them credit, the directors and the production team, because the period aesthetics here, the costuming and the set design, the production design is really great.
It is.
There's
yeah.
a lovely tangibility to it that is fantastic. It feels very 70s, and that is implemented into the camera work in a really great way. That is immersive. It's
Yeah.
very, very immersive. So
Yeah.
the production team and the costuming absolutely deserves a lot of praise here.
Agreed.
And that also comes back on the Cairnes and their vision for the film. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's well made. Given what was the budget on this movie?
it was, according to this, well, it doesn't say. I don't know. I'd have to look it up.
Yeah, I'm very, very curious about that because there was clearly money spent. I know the box office was somewhere around 10 to 11 million, something like that. But there was obviously a lot of commitment to practicality, which is nowadays not the cheapest way to make a movie, depending on what type of practicality you're going for.
Yeah.
So I do wonder how successful this movie was given that, because it does really look great.
It does. The only thing that I see here is that it was quote unquote low budget. They spent around $150,000 for visual effects.
Okay.
And it was they shot the film in a in a tight window. So probably not a lot. I would guess around a few million if I had to guess.
I was gonna say, which means if it is only a few million, technically speaking, that 11 million is a good number for a movie like that.
Yeah, because I don't think there was much in terms of marketing either. It played out South by. There was the reception there. That was about it. I'm sure there was a poster and a small trailer, but
I mean, let's say it was a $3 million budget, just spitballing a number. That means based on box office, that's that's over 3 times its budget.
yeah.
And usually you want to see a movie, in order to break even, you can't just make double that. You've got to do at least 3 to 4 times your budget in order to actually be a success. And if that's the case, maybe this movie did pretty well. I'd love to hear more about that.
And I'd be curious what its VOD sales are, because I don't think it was in theaters too long. It was on VOD within a few weeks.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sure it's doing okay there. I imagine it'll have streaming life.
Yeah. I hope so. I hope so. I know it's on Shudder, as well as I think you can watch it on AMC Plus as well. But yeah, so maybe on Prime, you could, spend some money towards it and contribute to its success.
All righty. Well, there you go. If you agree or disagree with any of our thoughts, let us know. You can leave a comment on here below if you're watching on Facebook, or reach out to us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can email us in sessionfilm@gmail.com. And I think that is it. Brendan, do you have any final thoughts before we get out of here for this episode?
We didn't really talk about the ending. The ending ends on a really ambiguous note. And I kind of dug it. I kind of dug where it actually goes. Kind of leads to this question of, so Jack Delroy, the main character, did he actually have something to do with the horrible things that happen by the end? And I think it's that
is a good question. I do remember seeing that, because there is like this hallucinatory sequence right before you get to that kind of final image. And yeah, it is suggestive of something quite morbid and harrowing as to what his actions in it all are. I will say this, though. given that final shot and where we see certain characters and how they're laying on the floor, it is evident of what happened to them, how we saw them actually happen to them.
Yeah, that's not ambiguous.
Except for the final thing. Yeah, I guess I'll say the final thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, he certainly had more involvement there. And it's kind of hard. Like, it's pretty heartbreaking how we see that.
It is. And there are little clues that suggest whatever is being summoned kind of knows Jack Delroy a little bit. At least that there is an acquaintance.
Even before the final action.
Yeah, but
yeah.
By the end, kind of maybe at least toys with this suggestion that all of this happened as some type of deal with the devil of sorts to help his show, and a sacrifice that had to be made, and it happened to be the sacrifice he didn't want to make, and it's now... This is what I love about his performance, is that it's so guilt-ridden. And by that moment, as hallucinatory and distracting as it might seem, because it is out of nowhere, it's so disconnected from the gimmick, but his performance still makes it work.
No, his performance is the only reason I think it works at all, because again, narratively, there is a level of triteness to it, but also the sacrifice involved, there's not much of a relational exploration that allows for much emotion to come through.
Yeah.
That outside of a broad stroke empathy, there's really not much emotion to be had. However, again, Dastmalchian makes it work in his performance. Like, he does bring this guilt, this horror to it that is fantastic. So, I mean, without it, those final scenes fall apart altogether, I think.
Well, they just seem distracting. They seem kind of hammy in a way. Like it's trying for something that it doesn't earn.
Yeah, and for a film that wasn't really aiming for much ambiguity, at least that kind of ambiguity, I don't know, it was a little weird.
Well, then it basically what it suggests is that it's channeling his conscience and perspective onto the live broadcast, which is an interesting way to go about it. And I think doing it in that way, from that perspective, kind of helps justify it a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Anything else?
Good movie.
That's all you got?
Good movie.
Yeah, I liked it. I liked it as well. Definitely urge people to go and check it out. You'll certainly have to wrestle with the AI of it all.
Yeah, fair.
And again, I don't agree with it, but it's ultimately a small, thing that you're not going to notice while watching the movie.
Right.
Doesn't make it okay, but the movie in a vacuum on its own terms, I think is pretty good. I did enjoy it.
Yeah,
I liked it. And David Dastmalchian, one of the best performances of the year so far.
Oh, he's so good.
At least on the male side.
Always loved this guy. I always loved this guy.
Yeah, I do wonder if he'll be involved at the In Session Film Awards at the end of the year. If for nothing else, best surprise performance.
I was going to say best surprise might be a lock at this point.
I agree. Yeah, no, I'm with you there. So, all right. Well, with all of that said, thanks everybody for listening. Go check out our Challengers review. It was quite the discussion.
It's quite challenging.
Also, go check out episode 583. Ryan McQuaid back on the show.
Yeah.
We start our Best Picture movie series talking about Rebecca. It was also a lot of fun. So with that, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast.
Good night from the devil.
I knew it was coming.